Slap. 35,000 feet. First class. One slap changes everything. Before we dive into this shocking first-class showdown, tell me where you're watching from and smash that like if you've ever seen someone bullied in public. Harriet Langston hadn't even buckled her seatbelt when Jack Morgan's hand whipped out of nowhere and cracked against her cheek. The crack echoed through Sky Vista Flight 4270's plush first-class cabin, silencing the hum of the engines, freezing the flight attendants mid-service, and transforming a routine morning flight into an instant spectacle. Every pair of eyes flicked toward Harriet. Cameras flipped up from pockets and purses. The polished mahogany surfaces trembled with tension. In that heartbeat, the passengers went from relaxed luxury to raw anticipation, desperate to see what would happen next. At 62, Chief Harriet Langston of Airport Security Operations knew exactly who she was, and she knew exactly who he was. But Jack Morgan, a decorated pilot with a reputation for rigid discipline, mistook her for just another passenger. He never saw the flash of her badge, the weight of her years in law enforcement, or the steely resolve that coursed through her veins. Harriet closed her eyes for a moment, tasting coppery blood on her tongue, then opened them to meet Morgan's stare. Her hand drifted inside her navy blazer pocket, fingers brushing the embossed leather case of her chief's badge. Every muscle in her body steadied. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her reel. "Captain Morgan," she said, voice calm but resonant, "I am Chief Harriet Langston, and you've just committed assault and battery." Morgan's face paled. The veneer of authority cracked. He had no idea the woman he slapped wore the uniform of his most powerful regulator. As the cabin lights glinted off her badge, Harriet dialed the FAA's Silent Ground Alert hotline. Behind her tinted divider in the cockpit, screens bloomed red with the words, "Ground Alert, Flight 4270. On hundreds of control room monitors across the nation, traffic controllers saw the same message. All flights led by Jack Morgan grounded immediately. Harriet pressed her lips together, fighting the sting on her cheek. The flight attendants, once frozen, flocked to her side, offering water and napkins. Passengers whispered and pointed, but no one dared challenge her. She had seized control of the narrative, and within 30 seconds, the show had irrevocably shifted. When the flight diverted to the nearest airport, engines winding down, Harriet rose from her seat, badge clipped back on full display. Security officers sprinted down the jet bridge, heading straight for Morgan's cockpit door. He stumbled forward, uniform crisp but hands trembling, surrendering to the consequences of his impulsive violence. Harriet stepped onto the tarmac, cool morning breeze brushing her face. Reporters and camera crews lined the edge of the walkway. Flashbulbs popped in rapid succession. Headlines were born in that moment. "Pilot slaps chief, instant grounding and license revoked." Amid the chaos, Harriet maintained a measured composure. Though her cheek throbbed, her spirit burned brighter than ever. She had turned a violent slight into an undeniable demonstration of justice. Moments later, in the airport's private conference room, Harriet summoned the Sky Vista legal team and press officers. A hush fell as she entered, mirror of her first-class coup. "We're filing a class action lawsuit for $5 million, she announced. "This isn't just about me. It's about every passenger who deserves equal respect, regardless of race or rank." Eyes widened around the table. Ship-shape executives gasped. The weight of her words, backed by the FAA's unprecedented alert, made clear Harriet Langston would not be shrugged off. Later that afternoon, when the story dominated national news, Harriet returned home to her quiet suburban street in Millfield. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A local florist delivered a bouquet with a note. "Thank you for standing up for all of us." As she accepted the flowers, the pain in her cheek flared once more, but it was nothing compared to the swelling pride in her chest. By bedtime, headlines scrolled across her television. Sky Vista Airlines hit with 5M discrimination suit. FAA grounds all flights tied to Captain Morgan. Chief Langston, a new standard for airline equality. Harriet smiled wryly. The first chapter of her ordeal had ended in victory, and she hadn't even broken a sweat. Yet she knew the fight wasn't over. Policies would be rewritten, training overhauled, and complacent minds challenged. As she prepared for bed, Harriet placed her chief's badge on the nightstand, next to her tablet loaded with articles and legal briefs. She closed her eyes, envisioning the next day's battle, refining the new anti-discrimination protocols she'd demand, meeting with FAA officials to ensure the ground alert remained a viable check on rogue captains, and speaking at community forums to amplify her message. The sting of that slap would fade. What remained was the echo of authority, an unequivocal reminder that justice travels at jet speed. And as Harriet drifted to sleep, she knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would reshape the skies. Harriet Langston stood in front of her bathroom mirror at precisely 6:45 a.m., her reflection caught in the cool, fluorescent light of her Millfield home. The steam from a hot shower curled around the edges of the frosted glass as she peeled the fabric of her police uniform off her shoulders and hung it neatly on the back of the door. Today wasn't a day for badges and starched hats. It was a day for boots and blue dress, for blending in while keeping her wits razor sharp. She reached for the simple, calf-length blue sheath dress she'd laid out the night before. The dress was unremarkable. No brass buttons, no visible insignia, but the cut was sharp, the fabric high quality. Harriet smoothed the dress over her hips, zipped the back, and ran her hands along the seams. She caught sight of the small box of accessories on the counter, a plain silver watch, a pair of understated pearl studs, and a slim leather wallet. She tucked the wallet into her blazer pocket later. For now, she needed minimal distractions. Slipping on low-heeled black pumps, Harriet took a deep breath. There was something almost ritualistic in this routine. 15 years earlier, when she'd been promoted to lieutenant, she'd followed a nearly identical sequence of motions. Remove the uniform, don plain clothes, steel herself for the mission ahead. But this time, the stakes felt higher. She had spent the last 3 months chasing complaints of racial profiling and discrimination at Sky Vista Airlines, only to watch her own superiors drag their feet. Today, she resolved, she would see things for herself. Her reflection folded into a half-smile. "Sometimes you have to go undercover," she told her image, her voice steady but low. "No one will believe it until they see it." A flicker of doubt. The memory of yesterday's staff meeting at Airport Security Operations still lingered in her mind. The glossy conference room, tinted windows overlooking the tarmac, and her team of analysts and supervisors around the long oval table. She remembered Lieutenant Parker's thinly veiled comment, the one that stung more than any slap could. Maybe we should have sent someone with more experience. Someone white. Her heart had clenched at the time, but she had maintained her composure. She nodded once, curtly, and let the meeting move on. But the message had settled in her chest like a stone. Despite her record, nearly 4 decades of service, she still had to prove her worth at every turn. That memory vanished as she picked up her badge holder from the shelf. She ran her thumb over the raised lettering, Harriet Langston, Chief of Airport Security Operations. She slid it back into its leather case and set it aside. There would be no badge today, at least not until she needed it. Booking the flight. At 7:00 a.m., the taxi pulled up to her front door. She slid her suitcase into the trunk and climbed into the back seat, sinking into the plush leather as the driver merged onto the early morning highway. The city was just waking up. Street lights flickered off. A few joggers passed on the sidewalks, and the smell of brewing coffee drifted from neighborhood cafes. She reviewed her plan on the tablet mounted on her lap. Sky Vista's complaints seemed to cluster around certain high-value first-class routes, flights that connected business hubs and generated the bulk of the airline's revenue. She'd booked herself into Seat 2B on Flight 4270, the 7:30 a.m. departure to Chicago. If discrimination really was more frequent on those routes, that's where she'd find it. A soft ping on her phone reminded her of the specific wording she'd sent to FAA headquarters. Immediate undercover audit of first-class boarding procedures on Flight 4270. High-profile route. Expect potential resistance. She'd attached the relevant case files and passenger complaint summaries. All that remained was to catch the flight. Arrival at Millfield International. The taxi eased to a stop in front of the curb at Millfield International Airport at exactly 7:29 a.m. The digital clock overhead chiming in welcome. Harriet paid the driver, thanked him, and stepped onto the polished concrete plaza. Through the glass walls, she could see the first-class check-in counters and the sleek metal accents of Skyvista's logo. The airport buzzed with activity. People rushed with wheeled bags. Families gathered in clusters. Business travelers strode purposefully toward their gates. She hoisted her carry-on and headed to the designated counter. A blonde attendant, mid-20s, professionally coiffed hair in a tight bun and wearing Skyvista's teal uniform, greeted a white businessman at the next podium with a warm smile and a friendly tone. The contrast was stark when the attendant turned to Harriet. Check-in encounter. "Good morning," Harriet said, voice smooth. "I'm here for Skyvista Flight 4270, Seat 2B. The attendant's smile froze. "ID and boarding pass, please." She held out a brown leather folder. Harriet handed it over. The attendant examined the documents with surprising intensity. Her eyes flicked from the boarding pass to the passport photo, lingering for an extra beat. Harriet noted the quicker pace with which the attendant dispatched the previous passenger. "Everything seems in order," the attendant said, returning the folder briskly. "Enjoy your flight." As Harriet stepped aside, she heard the attendant immediately revert to cheer as the white businessman approached. "Right this way, sir," she said brightly, handing him his documents with a flourish. Harriet's jaw tightened. This was exactly the behavior she'd been investigating. Blanket politeness for some, cursory compliance for others. She made a mental note of the attendant's name tag, Ross, and moved on. Security screening. Despite having TSA pre-check credentials, Harriet was funneled into the staffed security lane instead of the express line. She smiled politely at the officer who motioned her aside. To her right, she saw 3 other black passengers being pulled for additional screening. To her left, white travelers breezed through with little more than a nod. The security officer retrieved her purse, laptop, and shoes for standard inspection. Harriet stood patient, calm, deliberately scrutinizing the faces of the officers. Their polite professionalism bordered on mechanical, as if they were simply following orders to flag high-risk travelers. She noted badge numbers, uniform details, the subtle way each officer avoided eye contact. When her items finally cleared, she offered a silent nod of thanks and moved on. The message was clear. She would have to rely on her own eyes today. Approaching the gate. Walking through the terminal toward Gate B12, Harriet took in the scene. A video board listed Flight 4270's status as on time. Kiosks along the walls displayed last-minute upgrades and lounge access offers. She passed a Skyvista lounge. Windows tinted so darkly, only silhouettes showed within. She resisted the urge to eavesdrop on the lounge attendants behind their reception desk. Today, everything needed to be kept above board. As she neared the gate, she recognized the tall figure of Jack Morgan leaning against the counter. He was chatting with gate agents, several men in crisp suits, his captain's hat tucked under one arm. He laughed at something one of them said, the movement sending ripples through his uniform jacket. Nearby, an elderly black woman, clutching a handbag, approached the group. She asked, "Excuse me, can someone tell me when they're boarding for first class?" Morgan barely glanced her way. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of something. Please wait your turn," he barked, voice abruptly cold. The woman stepped back, embarrassed, and retreated to a bench. Moments later, a white couple approached with the same question. Morgan's tone shifted entirely. He greeted them warmly, explained boarding procedures in detail, offered to call them when it was time. Harriet paused, watching, her pulse quicken. She checked the boarding pass in her hand. Seat 2B, first class. She moved forward, heart steady. Settling in. When the attendant called boarding group 1, Harriet stepped forward. She navigated the narrow jet bridge, suitcase rolling behind her, and entered the first-class cabin. The attendant flashed her a thin smile, no warmth, no acknowledgement of the earlier standoff, and directed her to the aisle seat in row 2. The seat unfolded into a plush haven of cream leather and dark wood trim. Harriet stowed her bag, settled in, and clicked on the overhead reading light. She exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. All morning, she had been building toward this. A first-hand look at the discrimination she suspected had become standard procedure on lucrative first-class routes. She flexed her fingers, feeling the smooth leather of the seat beneath her palm. There would be one more test, one more interaction, before she could call the moment complete. Vem je calm. Before the storm. From her vantage point, Harriet watched as a flight attendant offered bottled water to each passenger, except those without matches to a certain demographic. She observed their body language, took discrete mental notes, and prepared herself for the final test, meeting the captain in person. Her mind drifted back to her childhood in Millfield, growing up an advocate for fairness, marches, speeches, petitions. She'd built a career on principle, from local precincts to senior security roles. She'd faced prejudice head-on, microaggressions in conference rooms, whispered doubts in break rooms, the outright dismissal of her leadership. Today, she reminded herself, was the culmination of that journey. Captain Morgan would soon cross her path, and when he did, everything would come into sharp relief. She adjusted the lapels of her blazer, took another slow breath, and fixed her eyes on the cabin door. In a few minutes, she would step beyond the safety of observation and into confrontation. Today, she wasn't just any passenger. She was Chief Harriet Langston, and she was about to rewrite the rules at 35,000 feet. Harriet's world slowed in that instant after Jack Morgan's blow. The cabin lights seemed to dim, the gentle hum of the engines receded, and every heartbeat echoed in her ears. Her cheek burned, a sharp electric pain, yet her mind remained crystalline, cataloging every detail around her. She lifted a trembling hand to dab at her split lip, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, as if the cabin collectively exhaled, flashbulbs popped from every corner. Phones, tablets, even a lone journalist's DSLR hidden beneath the armrest of one seat. Camera lights danced across the cream leather and dark wood trim, capturing the aftermath of a slap that would rip through headlines by the time they landed. Harriet took a steadying breath, exhaling slowly through her nose. She refused to let the sting of pain dictate her response. Instead, she surveyed the room, first class, row 2. Her colleagues in the back of her mind, the passengers around her, the silent witnesses to what had just transpired. A woman in the aisle across from her pressed her lips together, startled, eyes widening as she fumbled for her phone. A man 2 rows back retreated beneath the brim of his Panama hat, seeking to blend into anonymity. Even the flight attendant who had approached moments earlier, her name tag read Ross, stood frozen, hands clenched at her sides, disbelief etched across her face. All eyes were on Harriet. She straightened in her seat, chin high, back rigid. The uniform of her authority lay concealed beneath her navy blazer, but the quiet power of her posture spoke volumes. She allowed herself a thin, measured smile. No warmth, just calm assurance. The flight attendant's hesitation, Ross, the attendant, had ordered Harriet to move to coach before Morgan's slap. Now, Ross hovered at the end of the aisle, supplies dropped on the cabin floor, water bottles rolling as though startled into motion. She squared her shoulders and stepped forward, distributing bottled water to nearby passengers as if to fill the uncomfortable silence. When she reached Harriet, she offered the bottle with shaking hands. Harriet accepted it with a nod, her eyes kind but unyielding. "Thank you," she murmured. Her voice was soft, yet carried the weight of command. Ross paused, nodded again, then hurried back up the aisle. In those few seconds, Harriet had learned more of the attendant's character than any routine security audit could reveal. The hesitation, the small tremor in her voice, it told Harriet that behind the uniform, real people had real consciences. That realization would factor into her recommendations when she rewrote Sky Vista's training protocols. Internal monologue. He thought he could intimidate me, Harriet reflected silently. That he could strike me like a common criminal and get away with it. She rubbed her thumb over the water bottle's label, the plastic outline crisp beneath her fingers. But I'm no ordinary passenger. She felt a rush of something like exhilaration, pure, righteous. The adrenaline of confrontation surged through her veins, igniting her mind with clarity. Every step in her undercover plan, every carefully filed complaint over the past months, had led her here. And now, the moment had arrived. Still, she tempered that exhilaration with duty. There was no room for a show of vengeance. This was not about retaliation. It was about justice administered swiftly, fairly, and definitively. A subtle support. Out of the corner of her eye, Harriet saw a fellow traveler, an older black man in a tailored suit, move from his seat to stand discreetly in the aisle a few rows up. He watched Morgan's cockpit door with something like concern, yet remained out of reach of the cabin crew's authority. Harriet met his eyes for a heartbeat. A flicker of mutual recognition passed between them. Two professional black leaders, wronged by the same act of prejudice. She inclined her head ever so slightly in thanks. The man returned a respectful nod and sank back into his seat. That moment of solidarity warmed her, even as her cheek throbbed. The return of authority. Behind the tinted glass, the cockpit crew had already responded to FAA's alert. In the cabin, phones switched off recording modes as flight attendants regained composure. Morgan's abrupt exit had rattled them. Now, they moved with purposeful efficiency. They checked seatbelts, retrieved fallen service trays, and ushered passengers calmly as the pilot in command made the diversion announcement over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen," crackled the overhead speaker, "due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Lincoln Regional Airport. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further notice." A ripple of tension raced through the cabin, but at least the directive was clear. Harriet sat forward slightly, offering her arm to an elderly lady on the aisle next to her. The woman took it gratefully, whispering a "thank you" as Harriet squeezed her hand reassuringly. Eyes on the cockpit. Even as the cabin crew restored order, Harriet's gaze remained fixed on the cockpit bulkhead. She knew Morgan's authority was crumbling. FAA's silent ground alert was visible on monitors in ATC centers across the country. In a legal and regulatory sense, he had been stripped of his command, and the diversion meant he would be met on the ground by security officers. Yet Harriet watched with a mixture of satisfaction and contemplation. How swiftly power could shift. One impulsive assault had upended Morgan's career. One phone call had grounded hundreds of flights under his command. One calm declaration of authority had secured justice. Yet this was only the beginning. Quiet resolve. As the plane began its descent, lurching slightly as the tarmac of Lincoln Regional drew closer, Harriet allowed herself a small, inward smile. The pain in her cheek continued to pulse, but her spirit soared with resolve. This is for every passenger who ever felt invisible, for every person left waiting at a counter, for every complaint filed and ignored. She imagined the headlines. Chief Langston grounds Captain Morgan. FAA enforces zero tolerance. Sky Vista faces class action lawsuit. But she refused to get ahead of herself. There was work to do. Statements to file, legal briefs to draft, new security protocols to design. And tomorrow, once the world's eyes had moved on, she would still be here, concrete beneath her feet, sleeves rolled up, ready to effect lasting change. Final moments in the air. The descent continued smoothly. Passengers gripped armrests, looked out the windows, whispered to one another. Harriet leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the subtlest hum of the engine wash over her. There was no exhilaration without purpose, and no purpose without passion. She opened her eyes, fingers drumming lightly on her seat arm. Ground control's voice crackled in the cockpit, confirming the runway ahead. Engines slowed, landing gear extended, and the plane touched down with a gentle thud that reverberated through the cabin floor. Harriet sat poised, ready for the transition from sky to tarmac, ready to lead, ready to testify, ready to secure justice not only in this moment, but in every moment yet to come. As Flight 4270 rolled to a stop, Harriet Langston unlatched her seatbelt, slid out into the aisle, and straightened her navy blazer. Cameras in hand and hearts pounding, passengers watched her every step. But Harriet was not just walking off a plane. She was walking toward a new era of accountability at 30,000 feet and beyond. The moment the chartered jet dipped into cruising altitude, a brittle calm settled over the cabin. Passengers turned their attention back to magazines and screens, as if yesterday's routine flight had resumed. But Chief Harriet Langston knew better. She felt the tension like an electric charge in the air, an anticipation that something else was about to happen. 15 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant approached her seat again. This time, it wasn't water. It was a new challenge. "Ma'am," the attendant said, voice quavering between professionalism and unease. "I'm sorry, but I've been instructed to ask you to move to coach." Harriet looked up from her tablet, eyebrows arching. "Again?" she asked, calm as a placid lake. "Why?" The attendant hesitated, eyes flicking toward the cockpit door. "Balance issue. Captain's orders." Harriet lifted one brow, noting the empty cushion at 1C and the unoccupied suite in row 1. "Balance issue?" she repeated, voice soft but edged. "Would you ask that of any other passenger who purchased a first-class seat?" No answer, only the attendant's shifting weight. Harriet's jaw set. She closed her tablet, fixed it into her seat back, and leaned forward. "Look," she said gently, "I paid for this seat. If there's a safety concern, let me speak with the captain directly." The attendant swallowed. "He's busy." Harriet pressed her lips together. She'd faced worse bureaucratic runarounds in her decades on the force, but this felt different. It was personal. She stood, smoothing the skirt of her dress, and walked deliberately toward the bulkhead. As she neared the divider, Jack Morgan materialized in the doorway with the steely efficiency of a man who believed himself untouchable. His captain's hat was perched at a rakish angle, his expression cool, until it wasn't. "Chief Langston," he said, mask slipping, "you don't get to choose your seat." Harriet met his gaze evenly. "Actually, Captain Morgan," she replied, adopting the precise courtesy of a courtroom, "I do. That's how seating works." A flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. He stepped into the cabin, chest puffed, authority radiating like heat from an engine. Passengers paused, sensing a showdown. "I'm telling you to move," Morgan said, voice clipped. "Now." Harriet sighed, turning slowly so the cabin lights glinted on her badge clipped discreetly inside her blazer. She kept her voice low but unshakable. "Captain," she said, "my badge and this uniform are on the other side of that door. I'm here as a passenger. If you have a safety concern, make a public announcement. Otherwise, leave me in peace." Morgan's nostrils flared. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the electronic hum. "Easy way or hard way," he growled. "You move, or we make an emergency landing and remove you by force." All around them, cameras flashed again. Seats shifted. Passengers sat up straighter. The brass-heeled soles of Harriet's pumps clicked as she returned to her seat. She didn't flinch. When she sat, she caught a wide-eyed businessman's gaze. He mouthed, "Are you really not moving?" Harriet allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the memory of her first patrol as a rookie officer ground her, a time when she'd been shoved aside, ignored, bullied. Then she opened them, glancing at Morgan beyond the aisle seat. He thinks he can push me around like any other passenger. A rising tide of anger threatened to spill over, but Harriet corralled it into a cool reservoir of resolve. She unfurled her hand and picked up the in-flight menu as though nothing had happened. She skimmed the list of entrees, her mind ticking through steps. Document the incident, file a formal complaint, activate the ground alert, and pursue every regulatory avenue. Morgan barked an order at one of the flight attendants. "Get her out of first class." The attendant hesitated again, brow furrowing, but moved to comply. Harriet watched, expression impenetrable. "This is exactly why I'm here," she reminded herself. "To expose every instance of systemic bias, even at the highest altitudes." Overhead, the seatbelt sign winked on. The cabin crew resumed their positions. Harriet adjusted her posture, chest lifted, shoulders back. She took a slow sip of water, then set the bottle down with a deliberate click that sounded deafening in her ears. Morgan retreated to the bulkhead, indicating with a curt nod that Harriet should follow, but she remained seated. He turned back to her, ashen-faced now, uncertain. "Insubordination," he said. "We have procedures." Harriet interrupted, voice quiet but firm. "I have a procedure too. I boarded this flight. Now let it proceed." Silence. The only sound was the whir of the engines and a faint murmur of discontented passengers. Then, slowly, the captain faded back into his cockpit cubicle, crashing the door behind him. In that moment, Harriet felt a delicate shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The flight attendants relaxed incrementally. The passengers leaned back, some exhaling loudly as if releasing tension held in chest cavities. A few discreet nods of respect passed between strangers. Harriet let herself a small, private smile. Her invisible uniform, her rank, her integrity, had spoken louder than any decree the captain could offer. She reached into her blazer, palming the edge of her leather badge case. She hadn't revealed it yet, but soon. Very soon. For now, the battle lines were drawn, high above the world, in the hushed luxury of first class. A quiet war was raging, one that Harriet Langston was determined to win. Harriet Langston settled back into her seat, hands folded neatly in her lap. The tension in the cabin had reached a fever pitch after Captain Morgan's thundering ultimatum. For a moment, it looked as though he might force her out of first class or even attempt an emergency landing. But in that heartbeat of uncertainty, Harriet felt something shift deep inside her, a steely confidence born of decades enforcing rules, standing up to bullies, and protecting the vulnerable. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. A hush rippled through the passengers as they sensed that the confrontation wasn't over. Harriet's breathing remained even, though her heart hammered with righteous determination. She raised a hand to her blazer pocket and withdrew the slim leather case she'd kept hidden until now. The entire cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. Harriet flipped open the case, the metal badge catching the overhead lights and flashing like a beacon. Chief Harriet Langston Airport Security Operations. She held it up, pinning her gaze on the cockpit bulkhead where Morgan's silhouette lingered behind the glass. Then, turning slowly, she spoke with quiet authority that reverberated down the aisle. "Captain Morgan, I am Chief Harriet Langston of Airport Security Operations. You are under my jurisdiction." The effect was instantaneous. Passengers sat straighter. Flight attendants stopped their stations. Phones clicked off record mode, and Morgan himself froze. He had expected compliance, or at worst, grumbling defiance, not this unfolding spectacle of absolute power. Harriet continued, voice firm but composed. "Your assault constituted a criminal act, battery and discrimination. I've already contacted the Federal Aviation Administration. You'll be hearing from them momentarily." She drew her mobile phone from the other pocket, tapped the speed dial for the FAA silent ground alert line, and held it to her ear. A soft click confirmed the connection. "This is Chief Langston," she said crisply. "Activate silent ground alert on all flights under Captain Jack Morgan's command. Flight 427 dry included." A brief pause followed, long enough to let the cabin's tension thicken. Then the FAA controller's voice came through, clipped but respectful. "Roger that, Chief. Silent ground alert initiated. National Control Centers, please execute immediate grounding of all flights where Jack Morgan is PCG, primary commanding guider." Overhead, the cabin lights flickered in unison with the pilot's controls. Elsewhere on thousands of screens, the same alert was flashing red. Ground alert. Flight 4270 plus all Morgan-commanded flights. Harriet lowered the phone and clipped it back in her pocket. She took a slow breath, savoring the moment. The engine's soft roar resumed its normal level, no longer the soul sound dominating the cabin. Instead, the hum of authority filled the space. Morgan pressed his palm to the glass divider, jaw clenched so tight you could see the tendons strain in his neck. In that instant, he realized his career was effectively over. His license review would be automatic. His reputation, decades of flight time logged, safety awards won, vanished like mist in the morning sun. Harriet tucked her badge case away and leaned forward, addressing the silent cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We will divert to the nearest airport under security escort. I apologize for the inconvenience, but safety and respect are non-negotiable." A murmur of relieved applause fluttered through the rows. An elderly woman patted Harriet's hand gratefully. A businessman whispered, "It's about time." A group of younger travelers exchanged nods as though they'd witnessed a historic event. The cabin crew, once hesitant, now moved with purpose, guiding passengers to fasten seatbelts and preparing for the unscheduled landing. Harriet sat back, closing her eyes for a moment as adrenaline drained from her veins. The pain at her cheek was sharp, but secondary to the intoxicating sense of justice unfolding. She thought of all the complaints she'd reviewed over the past 3 months, testimonies of casual rudeness that escalated into outright discrimination. None of those passengers had ever received the kind of immediate vindication she'd secured. She opened her eyes, scanning the cabin. Ross, the attendant who'd tried to shift her to coach, now offered a genuine, apologetic smile. Another attendant discreetly brought her a cold compress and a bottle of water. Harriet gave a small nod of gratitude. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her tablet, already drafting the incident report. Bullet points would note the time, the exact words exchanged, the slap, the badge reveal, and the FAA's immediate response. She'd timestamped the activation of the ground alert, 10:51 a.m., 15 minutes after takeoff. Inner reflection. He never saw it coming, she thought, brushing a hand over her hair. He thought power belonged to him alone. But authority, real authority, derives from service, from the trust of those you protect. She remembered her earliest days as a patrol officer, responding to domestic disturbances, diffusing violent confrontations, and ensuring the vulnerable felt safe. Those lessons had guided her here. Another flash of memory. A trainee tucked away in a too large uniform, trembling under the weight of responsibility. A younger Harriet had learned to channel fear into focus. Today, she'd turned a moment of violence into a demonstration of the law. Passengers' silent support. From across the aisle, an older black man nodded respectfully. A young woman behind him gave a thumbs-up sign, as if to say, "We've got your back." Harriet caught those gestures and felt a rare warmth. She wasn't alone. In this cabin, on this flight, passengers had become allies, even passive ones, in her quest for fairness. She pressed the soft touch of her fingers to the fresh bruise forming on her cheek, a memory etched in skin. But that mark was more than an injury. It was the catalyst for systemic change. She imagined the ripple effect, FAA updating protocols, airlines retraining crews, passengers feeling empowered to speak up. A shift in the captain's cabin. Behind the cockpit's tinted window, Morgan was issuing terse commands. Flight logs would record the unscheduled diversion. Morgan's first officer, a younger pilot with kind eyes, glanced back at Harriet once more before focusing on the approach checklist. From the cockpit intercom, a calm voice explained the change in plans. A scent of purpose. Harriet closed her tablet and stood, smoothing the crease in her skirt. She gathered her blazer and slipped the cold compress back into her bag. The cabin crew cleared a pathway, and she walked to the front of the cabin. Badge clipped to her lapel now, her authority no longer secret. She turned once more to the cabin. "Thank you all for your patience. We'll be on the ground shortly, and I'll personally ensure we transition you smoothly." Her tone was sincere, nearly maternal, but unwavering. As she stepped through the divider door into the businesslike bustle of the cockpit escape hatch, she felt a surge of something new. Not just vindication, but momentum. The immediate crisis had passed, but the broader fight against discrimination in air travel was only beginning. Touching down. The descent into Lincoln Regional Airport was smooth. Harriet's footsteps on the jet bridge sounded decisive as she led the way off the plane. Security personnel waited in crisp uniforms, ready to escort Morgan from the cockpit and take his statement. Reporters and camera crews thronged the tarmac perimeter, shouting questions into the mic. Harriet raised a gloved hand in a brief wave, eyes forward as the flashbulbs popped. Her cheek was slightly swollen, but her posture was regal. She was not a victim. She was the executor of justice. Moments later, in the private debriefing room, she'd file her official report, consult with FAA investigators, and coordinate her next steps. A class action lawsuit draft awaited her review. Training, protocol revisions, community outreach, all lay on her horizon. But for this moment, Harriet Langston simply stood tall in the glare of photographers, the morning sun catching her badge. A chief who turned a slap at 35,000 feet into a nationwide affirmation of respect and equality. Justice, she thought, wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure the next person who climbed aboard that plane felt protected, seen, and valued. And so, as Flight 4270 sat on the tarmac, ground alert still glowing red on its systems, Harriet prepared to lead her next mission, rewriting the rules for every passenger in the sky. Harriet Langston felt the plane shudder as Captain Morgan's alternate pilot guided Flight 4270 toward an unplanned descent. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the gentle hum of the engines shifting to a lower pitch. A cold hush fell over the first-class cabin. Passengers stiffened in their seats, eyes widening as the seatbelt sign chimed back on. The dual captains' voices crackled over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're receiving an emergency directive from the Federal Aviation Administration. Due to an active ground alert on Captain Morgan's flight credentials, we will be diverting to Lincoln Regional Airport immediately. Please return to your seats with your seatbelt securely fastened." Harriet's chest tightened at the words, "diverting immediately." This was the moment the situation could spin out of control. Yet she remained composed, instinctively leaning forward to reassure the elderly woman beside her and a business traveler in the aisle seat. Both clutched armrests, faces pale with startled anxiety. She pressed a gentle hand on the older woman's arm. "It'll be okay," she whispered. "We're in good hands." Even Harriet's practiced calm might not fully erase their fear, but offering a measure of reassurance was what she did best. Flight Attendant Coordination Ross, the attendant who had tried to demote Harriet earlier, now moved with deliberate efficiency. She spoke into her headset, coordinating with the lead attendant at the rear. "Prepare the cabin for a quick descent. Serve water first, then secure galley carts. Keep passengers calm." Her voice trembled slightly, but her tone was professional, an evolution from her earlier hesitancy. The galley lights blinked overhead, signaling a secure cabin call. Ross picked up a cordless intercom. "Cabin crew, secure overhead bins and stow service items. In 15 minutes, we will begin our final approach." The call ended, and she turned to Harriet. "Ma'am, we'll be landing soon. If you feel unwell, please let me know." Harriet offered a tight smile. "I'm fine, thank you, but let me know if anyone else needs assistance." Ross nodded and moved on. Passenger reactions. Around the cabin, the mood was tense but controlled. A middle-aged woman in a floral scarf whispered into her husband's ear. A young man tapped the armrest rhythmically, eyes flicking toward the cockpit door. Newscasters on seatback screens updated the diversion notice in bold text. "Emergency landing initiated, diverting to Lincoln." The hum of conversation swelled beneath the flight attendant's directives. Harriet noticed the business traveler 2 rows ahead pulling out his phone and sending a text, likely to reassure colleagues on the ground. Another passenger, an elderly gentleman dressed in a sharp suit, closed his eyes and leaned back, placing a white handkerchief across his forehead as if bracing for a spill of turbulence. Harriet studied each reaction like pieces on a chessboard. Fear, confusion, even a flicker of anger. Some passengers glared at Morgan's bulkhead, his face obscured behind tinted glass. Others cast grateful looks at Harriet, recognizing her earlier intervention had kept things from getting far worse. Air traffic control coordination. Moments later, an overhead chime sounded as the cockpit communications system received another incoming message. The FO's voice carried a note of urgency. "Lincoln Regional Tower, this is Flight 4270. Confirm that ground security teams are ready to meet us on arrival. Over." A brief pause. Then the tower crackled back. "Flight 4270, Lincoln Tower, copy you. Ground teams are standing by. Fire and medical crews alerted. Expect runway 29er left." Behind the scenes, the flight data recorder and cockpit logbooks automatically stamped the diversion event. Harriet knew this technology inside and out, how it recorded data second by second, preserving an unbreakable chain of evidence. She made a mental note. Confirm the exact landing time, altitude, and airspeed upon touchdown. Every detail could matter later. Anxiety in the galley. Down the aisle, the flight crew worked diligently to stow carts and secure baggage behind the curtain. Harriet watched Ross tuck loose items into overhead bins. The attendants' brows knit in concentration. A few of the younger attendants, 2 men and a woman, exchanged quick, tense glances. They had been trained for emergencies, but few drills covered a powered diversion triggered by an FAA alert against their own captain. One young attendant approached Harriet quietly. "Chief," he said, voice low, "you handled that captain like no one else could. I just want you to know we appreciate it." Harriet offered a firm nod. "Stay focused. Keep everyone calm. We'll be on the ground soon." His shoulders relaxed just a fraction before he returned to his duties. Harriet's internal resolve. Harriet closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling steadily. A swirl of emotions, adrenaline, concern, satisfaction, vied for her attention. But above all, she felt clarity. This crisis wasn't random. It was the logical escalation of a captain's unlawful aggression. She had asked for this day, to witness the discrimination firsthand and expose it to the light. Now she was living her own test. In moments like this, leadership matters, she thought. Not just my rank, but my presence of mind. She reached into her blazer and withdrew her phone again, texting a quick note to FAA's regional office. "Flight diverted successfully. ET Lincoln 1117. Ground crew briefed. Will follow up with report." Her fingers tapped the screen with practiced ease. Captain's Dilemma. From her vantage point, Harriet noticed Morgan's reflection in the tinted cockpit glass. He stood next to the first officer, arms crossed, a grim set to his jaw. No more swagger, just resignation. The power he'd wielded a mere hour ago, dictating seat assignments, threatening an emergency landing, had been turned against him. She wondered if he truly understood the gravity. His license would be reviewed. FAA would investigate assault. Sky Vista's legal department would likely suspend him pending outcomes. His career lay in tatters, and hard reset was underway. Final approach. An announcement chimed again. "Flight attendants, prepare for arrival. Secure the cabin for landing." Ross and the crew moved swiftly. Headsets returned to their holders. Water service halted. Bins snapped shut with a resonant click. Harriet lifted her hand and checked her own seatbelt, tightening it just a notch. She'd braced for turbulence before. This was a different kind of landing, but she felt steady. The seatbelt sign blinked off just as the runway lights appeared beneath the left window. Headers read, "Lincoln Regional Airport, runway 29L." The engines revved as the plane lined up, wheels descending with a soft mechanical whine. The thrust reversed, slowing the aircraft with a muted roar. Within seconds, the jet rolled to a halt just shy of the terminal. Ground crews, safety vehicles, and a discreet squad of security officers were positioned like guardians in neon vests. The cabin crew exchanged looks of relief, some smiling faintly under their masks. Touchdown and transition. The cockpit door opened, and Harriet rose. She felt the weight of every eye on her as she passed the curtain, stepping into the aisle with deliberate grace. She held her badge discreetly, but visibly. No one could mistake her rank now. The lead security officer met her halfway down the jet bridge. "Chief Langston," he asked in a low voice. "We've got Captain Morgan under escort. Do you need immediate debrief before we proceed to the terminal?" Harriet nodded. "Yes. Let's handle the captain first, then I'll address the passengers and coordinate the next steps with the FAA team." She glanced back at the row of seats where her fellow travelers sat, some standing in anticipation, others still stunned by the ordeal. Harriet offered them a reassuring nod. They returned it with gratitude, even applause from a few voices uplifted by kindness and courage. On the jet bridge, the cool air of the terminal lobby washed over Harriet as she exited the plane. Reporters and cameras hovered at a respectful distance, the now familiar lights of news crews capturing every step. Harriet's cheek, wrapped in a discreet gauze patch, was no secret now. Its presence signaled the severity of what had happened. She followed the security officer down the narrow corridor. Behind the scenes, logistics teams logged the diversion, legal advisors prepared statements, and FAA representatives gathered data. All of it would feed into the investigation she would lead, and of triumph. Ahead, Captain Morgan stood in handcuffs, looking smaller than ever in his crisp uniform. Security officers guided him toward a waiting transport vehicle. Morgan's eyes flicked to Harriet. Fear, regret, recognition flickered in his gaze. Harriet paused, letting the moment settle in. She had transformed a moment of horrific disrespect into a demonstration of accountability. In a single flight, she had reasserted the principle that no one, no matter their title, could violate another's dignity with impunity. Then she turned back to the terminal doors and stepped into the bright lights of the airport lobby, ready to continue her fight for justice on the ground. Stepping off the jet bridge, Harriet Langston felt the cool rush of Lincoln Regional's terminal air conditioning and the even cooler glare of dozens of cameras trained on her. Reporters craned their necks, microphones bobbed, and the flashbulbs popped like distant thunder. She tucked her badge into her blazer pocket, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the security checkpoint where Jack Morgan stood cuffed, flanked by two officers. Her heels clicked crisply against the polished floor. Despite the throbbing in her cheek, she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly why she was here. This was more than a simple diversion or reprimand. This was the moment when justice would be publicly affirmed. As she approached, Morgan looked up, eyes haunted. The years of seniority that once earned him deferential nods from fellow pilots now meant nothing. His uniform hung awkwardly on his frame, the wings on his chest looking tarnished by his own disgrace. Harriet paused a few feet away and addressed the small crowd of onlookers and cameras. Her voice, amplified by a reporter's mic, rang out clear and unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we upheld the principle that no person is above the law, not even a captain at 35,000 feet. Assault and battery are criminal acts. Discrimination based on race or rank is intolerable. Captain Morgan's license has been revoked permanently, and he will face federal charges. A ripple of murmurs moved through the onlookers. Reporters hustled forward, shouting questions about criminal filings and potential jail time. Harriet remained composed, answering only what she needed. Yes, we have filed formal assault and discrimination charges with the FAA and the Department of Justice. Passengers on Flight 4270 will be offered full refunds and an additional compensation package. My office is working now with Sky Vista Airlines to ensure every crew member receives retraining on implicit bias and equal treatment protocols. A cameraman's booming shout. Chief Langston, do you feel vindicated? Drew a small, knowing smile from her. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Vindication isn't the right word. Protection is. Today, we protected passengers who expected safety, respect, and dignity. My hope is that this moment makes every traveler feel seen and empowered to speak up. She turned to the line of passengers, including the elderly woman she'd comforted at altitude. If any of you wish to share your experiences or support this case, my team is here. The woman stepped forward and embraced Harriet, a gesture of gratitude that made the cameras flash even more. Behind her, the two officers led Morgan toward a waiting transport vehicle. He glanced back once, expression a mixture of shame and realization. Harriet caught his eye, her own gaze steady, and inclined her head. Not in triumph, but in solemn acknowledgement that justice, though delayed, had been delivered. A viral moment. Within minutes, clips of that moment. Harriet's statement, Morgan's handcuffed figure, the passengers' reactions, had begun trending across social media platforms. Hashtags like #Chief Langston, #Justice, 35K feet, and #Grounded Captain shot up on Twitter and Instagram. News alerts pinged across smartphones. Chief of Security takes down discriminatory pilot. FAA revokes license on the spot. Harriet didn't watch the feeds. She had work to do. Still, she felt the swell of public support as she moved through the terminal toward a private conference room reserved by airport authorities. Corporate Confrontation. Inside, the Sky Vista Airlines regional director and legal counsel waited at a polished mahogany table. Documents, chevrons of press statements, and a set of prepared settlement figures lay before them. The director, mid-50s, gray at the temples, stood as Harriet entered. He offered a tight nod. Chief Langston, he began, voice careful. Sky Vista Airlines apologizes unreservedly for this incident. We recognize our failures and are committed to full cooperation. Harriet folded her arms. Apologies are a start, she replied evenly. But real accountability means policy change, restitution, and ongoing oversight. We will need a formal agreement. $5 million in class action compensation, mandatory retraining for all flight crews, and quarterly reporting of discrimination incidents to my office. The counsel cleared his throat. That figure is substantial. He glanced at the director, who lifted a hand in concession. We'll present it to the board immediately. I can't guarantee a yes today, but I'll advocate strongly. Harriet nodded once. I will draft the settlement terms. You have until Friday to sign. Until then, I expect daily updates on training module development and on the progress of passenger outreach. They exchanged documents, her draft terms, their committed timelines, and set the framework for a binding agreement. The director shook Harriet's hand, more earnestly this time. Thank you for your leadership, he said. The movement ignited. Leaving the conference room, Harriet's phone buzzed. A text from her deputy read, FAA confirms license revocation, DOJ filing underway. She allowed herself a breath of relief. Step by step, the legal machinery was turning. In the arrivals hall, passengers from Flight 4270 trickled out, smiling, hugging, sharing footage of Harriet's statement on their phones. An airport employee handed her a printed petition signed by dozens of staff calling for permanent policy reform. Harriet paused to review it. Names of security officers, cleaners, cafeteria staff, all had witnessed the aftermath and wanted change. She slipped the petition into her briefcase, heart warmed by the grassroots momentum. Looking ahead. By the time she stepped into an unmarked SUV bound for the airport's executive office, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Harriet stared out the window at the runway lights blinking in the dusk, a reminder of the miles she'd traveled and the path still ahead. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the State Attorney General's office requesting coordination on community outreach, followed by an email from the mayor's office praising her swift action. The municipal world was mobilizing. Schools wanted her to speak. Community centers asked for town hall meetings. Journalists queued up interview requests. Harriet exhaled, feeling the weight of it all. The immediate crisis, Captain Morgan's assault, had been handled. But systemic change required sustained effort. She looked out at the grounded planes, now lined up like silent sentinels awaiting new orders. This is bigger than one flight, bigger than one airline. She tapped her phone. Draft community outreach plan. Schedule press briefing Monday. Coordinate with FAA on national policy recommendation. A new chapter was beginning, one where every passenger, crew member, and regulator would be part of the journey toward genuine equality in the skies. And at its helm stood Chief Harriet Langston, guardian of both safety and justice, determined that no one would ever be underestimated or disrespected again. By late afternoon, the fallout from Flight 4270 had gone fully viral. News outlets ran slow-motion replays of Jack Morgan's slap across millions of screens. Social media feeds exploded with outrage. Hashtags like #GroundedForGood and Justice. Langston trended globally. Even outside the aviation community, people were talking about the moment a high-flying captain learned no one, regardless of rank, could assault a passenger with impunity. In a polished TV studio, Jack Morgan sat under harsh lights, wearing a dark suit that did little to hide the stiffness in his shoulders. His once prized pilot's wings had been ceremoniously removed from his lapel. Across from him, the anchor, a seasoned journalist, held up a printed statement from the FAA. License revoked permanently effective immediately. Anchor. Captain Morgan, after the FAA's unprecedented ground alert directive and your assault on Chief Langston, your pilot's license has been revoked. Do you regret your actions? Morgan, voice strained. I'm deeply sorry for the incident. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. I didn't realize who she was. His apology felt hollow even to his own ears. The camera zoomed in on the faint bruise on his cheek, evidence of his own downfall. Viewers could see the conflict in his eyes, shame, regret, and dread about what came next. At Skyvista's headquarters, the legal team prepared for multiple class action suits. Emails pinged with demands from passenger advocacy groups, each seeking compensation and policy guarantees. The corporate office's lobby featured a low-key apology banner. Skyvista Airlines, we are committed to respect and equality. But the words rang empty in the wake of millions of scorned viewers. Meanwhile, in living rooms across the country, people shared their own stories of being overruled, ignored, or demeaned in airplanes, stories that had previously gone unheard. A retired school teacher posted on Facebook, I had to stand in coach for an hour while first class sat empty. No one asked me why. Thank you, Chief Langston, for showing them who we really are. Online petition signatures hit the tens of thousands, all calling for mandatory discrimination awareness training in every airline cabin crew. Aviation forums buzzed with detailed analyses of Morgan's flight record, flight hours, commendations, sting operations, now tainted by a single impulsive act. Back in her office at Airport Security Operations, Harriet watched the media coverage with quiet resolve. She scrolled past headlines. Pilot's career grounded in minutes. Chief Langston's badge, a symbol of equality. FAA sets new precedent for zero tolerance. She minimized the browser and opened a blank memo. Phase 2, systemic reform. Today was about consequences. Tomorrow would be about building safeguards so no one else suffered the way so many passengers had over the years. Across town, Jack Morgan's phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from former colleagues, messages from disgruntled passengers, and at least one offer from a fringe talk radio host looking for sensational sound bites. He finally silenced it, staring at his reflection in a dark window. The captain's hat he once wore with pride now seemed a cruel joke. In the evening news wrap-up, the anchor summarized, "Morgan's downfall was swift. From the cockpit to the hot seat in record time, he's now a case study in why authority must be held to account." And just before sign-off, a teaser for tomorrow's segment, how one woman's courage is changing airline culture forever. As the broadcast faded to commercials, Harriet allowed herself a brief smile. The moment had passed, but its impact rippled outward. Beyond this flight, beyond these headlines, into the broader culture of air travel. Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of power get called out for their actions? Drop a comment with your story and hit like if you believe true accountability can spark real change. 2 days after Flight 4270's dramatic diversion, the hangar at Millfield International Airport was transformed into an impromptu media center. Banners reading "Zero Discrimination Protocol" draped along the walls. Rows of cameras and microphones faced a long table where Chief Harriet Langston sat alongside FAA officials and Sky Vista representatives. Harriet adjusted her papers, taking in the room packed with reporters eager for every detail. She tapped the microphone and smiled, steady, resolute, unmistakably in command. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on short notice. Yesterday, we demonstrated that assault and discrimination on a commercial flight are unacceptable and that the law will act swiftly. Today, we're taking the next step, systemic reform." She cleared her throat. Behind her, a slide illuminated the wall. "Zero Discrimination Protocol," spelled out in bold letters with 5 key pillars. Mandatory bias training for all Sky Vista crew, renewed annually. Clear complaint channels with guaranteed response times. FAA silent ground alert now explicitly codified for any flight crew assaulting or discriminating against passengers. Passenger compensation framework. $5 million class action fund, divided equitably among validated claimants. Independent oversight board comprising community leaders and legal experts to audit enforcement. Harriet. These measures aren't just for Sky Vista. We're recommending federal adoption across all U.S. carriers. Every passenger deserves respect, no exceptions. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and the Sky Vista CEO, seated to her right, nodded in solemn agreement as he handed Harriet a thick stack of signed settlement agreements. Harriet. Sky Vista Airlines has agreed to a $5 million class action settlement. This fund will compensate passengers who experienced discrimination or assault on any Sky Vista flight in the past 5 years. Additionally, $1 million will support community outreach programs educating travelers on their rights. She paused, lowering her gaze to meet the lens of a prominent network camera. Harriet. Justice isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous commitment to fairness. With these reforms, we ensure that no one, regardless of race, age, or status, faces prejudice at 35,000 feet or on the tarmac. A reporter raised her hand. "Chief Langston, what safeguards prevent future violations?" Harriet leaned forward. "Every crew member will face real consequences, from immediate grounding to license revocation, if they violate this protocol. Complaints will be tracked publicly, and the Oversight Board will publish quarterly reports. Transparency will be our greatest deterrent." As she wrapped up, the room erupted in applause. Cameras zoomed in on her composed expression, no trace of the black eye she concealed beneath a discreet bandage. When the microphones finally switched off, reporters swarmed Sky Vista's CEO with follow-up questions. But Harriet stood back, offering quiet smiles to the community leaders she'd invited. A local pastor, a veteran air traffic controller, and a passenger rights advocate. Together, they represented the Oversight Board, guardians of the new standard she'd helped set. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Harriet lingered by the banner. She traced her finger over the words, "Zero Discrimination Protocol," and let out a slow breath. "We've built the foundation," she thought. "Now comes the hard part, keeping every flight true to these promises." With that, Chief Langston picked up her folder and walked out into the late afternoon sun, ready to turn policy into practice. One passenger, one flight, and one milestone at a time. That evening, Harriet Langston drove down the tree-lined streets of Millfield with the hum of her sedan's engine as a gentle soundtrack. The sun dipped low, casting long golden rays across manicured lawns. For the first time in days, she felt the tension untangle from her shoulders. Pulling into her driveway, she climbed the familiar steps to her front porch. The night air was cool, and the porch light revealed potted ferns and a welcome mat worn smooth by countless footsteps. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. The quiet neighborhood, the windows glowing warmly, the sense of home. Inside, her granddaughter Mia bounded down the hallway, eyes wide. "Grandma, you're back! We missed you!" She threw her arms around Harriet's waist. Harriet lifted her into a hug, breathing in the scent of vanilla from Mia's hair. Behind them, her daughter, Officer Elena Langston, smiled, handing Harriet a mug of chamomile tea. "Long day?" Elena asked. Harriet sank into her favorite armchair. "Longest," she admitted, cradling the warm mug. "But it was worth it." Mia climbed into her lap, curling against her grandmother. Harriet ruffled her curls, glancing at the stack of letters on the coffee table. Each envelope bore different handwriting, some neat cursive, some hurried scrawl, but all addressed to Chief Langston, or Harriet. Her daughter watched curiously as Harriet opened the first letter, a thank you from a retired teacher who'd watched the live broadcast. "You gave me courage to speak up," it read. The next was from a flight attendant in another state. "I've already shared your story with my team. We're changing how we greet every passenger." Tears glistened in Harriet's eyes. She looked at Mia's expectant face and felt a swell of pride. "Look at this," she said softly, reading another note out loud. "Your actions reminded me that respect isn't optional. Thank you for showing true leadership." Elena sat beside her mother. "You know, I've already had officers volunteering for the new oversight board. They're ready to train and to change." Harriet nodded, sipping her tea. "This is more than words. It's a movement." She closed her eyes, picturing the first-class cabin, the flash of her badge, the grounded planes. It felt like a lifetime ago, and also like yesterday. Mia tugged on her sleeve. "Grandma, can you tell me the story again? When you showed them who was boss?" Harriet chuckled, lifting Mia into her arms. "All right, kiddo. But this time, let's talk about how everyone, young and old, can stand up for what's right." As she spoke, Harriet felt the quiet victory settle around her. It wasn't about fame or cameras. It was about every person who'd seen their own experiences reflected in her fight. People of every background who now felt empowered. Later that night, after tucking Mia into bed, Harriet returned to the living room and set the letters beside her laptop. She drafted a brief note to her new oversight board. "Thank you for stepping up. Together, we'll keep this promise alive." She shut the laptop and sat back, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock. The world beyond her window was calm, a stark contrast to the storm she'd weathered. Yet she knew the real test lay ahead, ensuring that justice and respect remained more than headlines. But for now, wrapped in the warmth of family and community gratitude, Chief Harriet Langston allowed herself a moment of peace. In her own living room, far from the glare of cameras, she felt the quiet affirmation of a fight worth fighting and a home worth coming back to. Harriet Langston sat before a simple backdrop, a sleek banner that read "Stand Up for Skies of Respect," flanked by the Sky Vista logo and the FAA seal. The glow of a ring light reflected in her eyes as the red recording dot flashed on her camera. She took a breath, straightened her blazer, and smiled. "Hello, everyone. Chief Harriet Langston here. Today, I'm asking you to join me in making air travel safer and more respectful for every single passenger. She paused, leaning forward slightly. If you've ever felt ignored, disrespected, or downright mistreated on a flight, this is for you. Harriet held up a printed petition titled Passenger Rights Pledge. I've worked with the FAA, Sky Vista Airlines, and community advocates to create this petition. It calls for comprehensive bias and respect training for all airline staff, transparent channels for reporting misconduct, and stronger accountability measures, like the ground alert we activated to protect me on Flight 427. She clicked the petition into view on a tablet next to her. Here's how you can help. Click the link below to sign the Passenger Rights Pledge. It only takes a minute, and your name adds real weight to our cause. And if you've witnessed discrimination in any public space, on a plane, at a hotel, or anywhere, hit that like button and share your story in the comments. Harriet's tone was warm but urgent. Right now, we have momentum. Airlines are watching, regulators are listening, and communities everywhere are talking about respect in the skies. Don't let this moment pass. Add your voice today. Together, we can turn a single act of injustice into a lasting standard of dignity. She reached out and tapped her badge pinned to her lapel. I stood up for myself at 35,000 feet. Now I'm asking you to stand up for everyone who steps onto an airplane, from the moment you check in to the time you land. Sign the pledge, share the video, and let's make respectful skies the rule, not the exception. Harriet nodded sincerely. Tell me where you're signing in from. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see this map light up with support from all over the world. And if you're already part of an advocacy group or working in the industry, let me know how we can collaborate. She leaned back, folding her hands. Thank you for being part of this. Your signature isn't just words on a page. It's a promise to every traveler that they deserve respect. I'm Chief Harriet Langston, and I'm counting on you. Let's fly right. The camera clicked off. In the silence that followed, Harriet allowed herself a quiet smile. The petition link glowed on her screen, ready to collect thousands, perhaps millions, of names. And at that moment, she felt certain. This call to action would echo far beyond her own flight. The video of Flight 4270's diversion had faded from trending lists, but its impact lingered like contrails against a clear sky. Weeks later, Chief Harriet Langston returned to Millfield International Airport, not as a newsmaker, but as a guardian of the new standards she'd helped establish. She strolled through the newly renovated first-class lounge, its staff now greeting each passenger with consistent courtesy. A discreet plaque near the entrance read, "Zero Discrimination Protocol in Action," a quiet testament to the journey from crisis to reform. Harriet paused by a digital board displaying live flight statuses. Flight 4270 still appeared, now flagged as Class Action Route, an acknowledgement of those who'd come forward with stories of mistreatment. She allowed herself a small hidden smile. Nearby, a group of uniformed crew members clustered around a tablet. One of them, a young flight attendant named Mia Ross, scrolled through the Passenger Rights Pledge signatures. Harriet had recognized her from the original incident, the nervous attendant who'd hesitated before challenging a captain's orders. Now, Mia's grip on her tablet was confident. "Chief Langston?" Mia asked, stepping forward. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your leadership changed how we train our entire staff. Every trainee I mentor hears your story first." Harriet nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Mia's shoulder. "You did the hard work," she replied. "Keep it up." Mia's eyes shone. "We're seeing fewer complaints, and passengers actually tell us when they feel safe. It's rewarding." Harriet glanced at the bustling lounge. Families laughing over coffee, business travelers reading in calm comfort, seniors reclining without worry. The difference was palpable. "This is what it's all about," Harriet said. "Justice that transforms lives." She continued through the terminal to Gate B12, where a new plaque hung. "Dedicated to Chief Harriet Langston, champion of respect in the skies." Passengers paused to read it, snapping photos with their phones. A retired teacher patted the plaque gently, murmuring a heartfelt thanks. As the boarding call began for the next flight, Harriet found her old seat, 2B, now occupied by a young mother and her toddler. The mother offered Harriet an apologetic smile as she gathered her child's blanket and toys. "Sorry, ma'am," she said. "I thought this was her seat." Harriet returned the smile warmly. "No worries," she said. "Just make yourself at home." She moved to the seat behind, settling in without fanfare. The toddler waved at her, so she waved back, genuine and bright. Across the aisle, another passenger read a guide titled, "Your Rights Aboard." Harriet took a deep breath, listening to the soft murmur of boarding passengers. Voices layered with anticipation, trust, and ease. She thought of the long road from that slap at altitude to this moment of normalcy. Yet as she buckled her seatbelt, Harriet knew the work wasn't done. Policies would need constant vigilance, training refreshed regularly, and community voices kept at the table. Equality in the skies required more than a single victory. It demanded ongoing commitment. The engines powered up, the seatbelt sign winked off, and the boarding process continued seamlessly. Harriet leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The skies are clearer now, she reflected. But echoes of change must never fade. What do you think is the most important step to keep airlines accountable and ensure respect for every passenger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the dialogue going.